Continuing education knows that at the end, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Good morning. Welcome to the Conference on World Affairs 2025. I am Erin Frazier. I am the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Constituent Engagement and Technology here at the University of Colorado at Boulder, and I am so honored to welcome you here today. I'm also honored to welcome our wonderful panelists, who I will have a moment to introduce shortly. I'm going to start with some statements about the panel for the recordings that will be available later, and then I'll share our land acknowledgement. So today is Tuesday, April 8th, 2025. It is 10:30 a.m., and this is panel 18110. The panel today is The Freedom to Read, Navigating Book Bans, Libraries, and Censorship. And now I invite you to sit with me and listen to our land acknowledgement. Before we get started, the University of Colorado Boulder, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous peoples in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on Indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. We will do this by recognizing and amplifying the voices of Indigenous CU Boulder students, staff, and faculty and their work, educating, conducting research, supporting student success, and integrating Indigenous knowledge, consulting, engaging, and working collaboratively with tribal nations to enhance our ability to provide access and culturally sensitive support, and to recruit, retain, and graduate Native American students in a climate that is inclusive and respectful. So one other thing I'd like to mention is that we want to make sure you have a chance to ask questions. This is how we're going to handle the Q&A for today's panel. I will reserve some time at the end for discussion and that question and answer. We're using a note card system, and so that's how we'll receive the questions from the audience. At any time in the session, simply raise your hand to request a note card and pencil from one of our producers, and I would love it if our producers could give a wave. We have one back here. All right, thank you. Please write legibly for my sake. Thank you. If you are a student, please note this in your question on the card. When you finish, raise your hand and hand it to the producer who will bring it up to me. I urge everyone to make your questions brief and to the point. As I like to joke, questions end with a question mark. And now I'd like to do a brief introduction for each panelist, and for more information, you can find their full bios on the CWA website. So starting at the end, I'd like to introduce and welcome back returning panelist Danielle SeeWalker, a Native American artist, writer, activist, and self-described boy mom from the Standing Rock Sioux Nation. Her work blends bold visual storytelling with deep cultural narratives, often exploring themes of identity, resilience, and the expression of the stories of her lived experiences and her elders. Based in Denver, she uses her art and her voice to challenge stereotypes, amplify Native American perspectives, and promote social justice. She is also the co-chair of the Denver American Indian Commission, where she advocates for Native communities through policy, education, and cultural programming, and through her advocacy has helped establish the Office for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Relatives for the state of Colorado. Welcome, Danielle. Next, I'd like to welcome Karin Grönvall. She is the National Librarian of Sweden, leading the National Library in its mission to preserve and provide access to Sweden's cultural heritage. With a strong background in library science and public service, she has been instrumental in advancing open access to knowledge, digital transformation, and the role of libraries in democratic societies. Grönvall advocates for equal access to information, promoting libraries as inclusive spaces for learning, research, and innovation. Under her leadership, the National Library of Sweden continues to be a global example of how libraries can evolve to meet the challenges of a digital and information-driven world. Welcome, Karin. Next, I'd like to welcome David Farnand, the director of the Boulder Public Library, where he has been a driving force behind reimagining the role of public libraries in the 21st century. Boulder Public Library receives more than 1 million visitors per year, which is more than 10 visits per capita, the highest visitor rate of any city or metro library in Colorado. Farnand is known for championing innovative programs that support civic engagement, the arts, and access to technology. His vision emphasizes the library is not just a place for books, but a cornerstone for community connection and cultural growth. With a strong commitment to equity and public service, David Farnand continues to shape the future of libraries in Boulder through his dedicated service, even going so far as to put his beard on the line for 1 million minutes read. Welcome, David. And now I'd like to welcome Nicole Ellison. She is the Carl E. Weick Collegiate Professor of Information at the University of Michigan School of Information. A leading scholar in the field of social media and computer-mediated communication, Professor Ellison's research explores how online environments influence relationship development, social capital, and self-presentation. She is particularly well known for her groundbreaking work on the social impacts of platforms like Facebook, shedding light on how digital connections shape our offline lives. Her interdisciplinary approach bridges information science, communication, and sociology, making her one of the most respected and most cited voices in studying and understanding how technology affects human behavior. Welcome, Nicole. All right, as we get started, I would invite our panelists to share a little bit about what you thought about when you saw today's panel title, or something that you're reflecting on based on this concept of the freedom to read. Danielle?
Hihane washte mitakuyapi, Danielle SeeWalker, machiapi, mahum papa lakota na ucheti shakuene mahata, Denver, Colorado, awati. Greetings, everyone. I always like to start off by introducing myself in my language, the Lakota language, which was a language that was here way before English, and a language that was censored for a very long time. My language is not a written language. Historically, up until very, very recently, we documented our histories and our storytelling and our community, et cetera, through drawing and documenting by imagery. And I'm an artist. I think innately I'm an artist. I like to express myself through visuals. I'm not a writer. I have written a book, but it was painful to write that. I hate writing, to be honest, but it's necessary. When I was asked to do this panel, I thought, well, I wonder why I was asked to be on a panel about banned books and censorship, but then I realized that I myself have been censored in my form of art recently by being denied a residency in the town of Vail because they didn't like one piece of my artwork that had nothing to do with them. I'm now registered on the National Coalition of Censorship, Against Censorship, and so I think there's a multitude of reasons why I was asked to be part of this panel, and I'm just excited to share in the conversation with my fellow panelists and also you as the audience. It's always very much important that we have a dialogue versus us talking at you. So I really hope that you have questions. So that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you. Karin.
Thank you. When I heard about the topic, I would like to share with you an experience from the National Library when we had a visit. As you know, Sweden is well known for the Nobel Prize in Literature. We also have another global prize, and that's for children's literature, and that's the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award. That's also a global award. And 2 years ago, this award went to Laurie Halse Anderson, that you probably know. It's an American writer. She writes for young people. She's done Shout, Cry, etc. And her books are often banned in school libraries. And before the ceremony, she visited us at the National Library, and we had some great conversations, and we showed her the Astrid Lindgren archives, and that's immense archives. It's about 140 meters with diaries, manuscripts, children's letters, etc. And she was amazed by these stories that children shared with Astrid Lindgren, the writer, that they couldn't even share with their parents, because Astrid also wrote about existential issues like death, relationships, etc. Very, very strong children letters. But the moment Laura actually started to cry was when we showed her a small edition of The Brother Lionhearts. The Brother Lionhearts is also a story in a fantasy setting for children. It's about evil and good. It's about young people dying very young, etc. It's also about uprising against power. An edition we showed her was a small so-called Samizdat edition that had been forbidden in the Czechoslovakia, in the state of Czechoslovakia during the communist era in Europe, because they thought it dealt with, against the power, etc. And this little Samizdat edition was sort of copied by hand and spread in secret. And Laura was so touched by the connection between authors, during centuries, that it's, and very strong feeling of keeping stories going, and also to deal with these very important issues for young people that can make such a big difference for them to keep talking about. And I certainly share this strong connection that Laura showed us and talked about with us. And historically, it's always been these sort of book bans, and they've always been argued like, we need to protect someone else. It's always someone else that needs to be protected. And about 100 years ago, when the libraries sort of started to get around for public libraries, the issue was really how to get hold of information and books of good quality. Today, it's very easy to get hold of information and books. So I think this is really a paradox that you ban books today when it's so easy to get hold of information. And I also think it really shows the power of literacy, the power of literature, and the power of libraries, open to everyone, and should be open with everything that everyone wants to read as well. So the integrity of libraries, that's really what I would like to keep discussing here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karin. David.
Good morning. I'm David Farnand. I'm the director of the Boulder Public Library. I'm very pleased to be here today with you all. I'm going to start with a quote from Mark Twain. The city of Concord, Massachusetts banned his book Huck Finn, and they said, "It is racist, coarse, trashy, inelegant, irreligious, obsolete, inaccurate, and mindless." And Twain said to his publisher, "We have a tip-top puff. We will definitely sell over 25,000 copies in New York City." The process of banning books in the United States is a long history, and it is typically characterized, as Karin referred to, in a number of ways. So the first and foremost, predominantly, is parental panic. Parental panic is one of the primary reasons for, it's always for the children, right, for the children. Personal prejudice is also a high criterion for banning books. A demographic panic, a type of thing where there's a legitimacy crisis. We're worried somehow that the voices of of our ancestors are going to be made obsolete through going away. And then finally, the reason is really just a singular will to power, right? It is this desire to control the situation, and the best means that people feel to do that is to erase the history of other people. So what we are seeing currently in the United States, and really over the past, book bans have been around, and when I first started talking about this again about 7 years ago, I'd said, well, they've been around forever, we've seen this before. They have been around forever, and we have seen some of it before, but what we have not seen is the kind of instrumentalization of book banning that we're seeing in this country right now. It is extraordinarily well-funded. It is done by political groups. Over 70% of the books that were banned last year emerged either from an organized group or through elected officials. Those were 70% of the bans that the American Library Association dealt with. That's a terrifying kind of metric. The reality is that they're extraordinarily well-funded, and there is no ambiguity, really, in my mind now after 7 years of seeing constant attempts to ban books. These are attempts to erase histories by and about Black and LGBTQ authors. It is almost nothing else. If you read the list of books from Dr. Toni Morrison to Dr. Maya Angelou to Ta-Nehisi Coates. Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me, I don't know how many of you have read it. The book was extraordinarily popular. And I'm trying to think, what in the world could you possibly be objecting to in this book other than the content of the book? There's no pornography in the book. There's no semblance of sexuality, which you would have to explain to your teenage son or daughter. There's nothing of it. It's just relating the history of this country in a message of a father to his son at a time at which there is extraordinary racism in the United States. So I don't think we can be general about what we're seeing right now. There is a case that's currently was upheld yesterday this past month in Elbert County, just slightly east of Denver, where the elected officials removed 19 books from the school shelves. A federal court put an injunction against it just a couple of days ago. This is happening literally every day in Colorado. People are coming forward to ban books. Librarians have also become targets of criminal prosecution. So this is not the case in Colorado. I'm grateful to say in 2024, the legislature passed a law which makes it more difficult to ban books and makes it a violation to criminalize the work of a librarian. So in the case of Boulder Public Library, I am the defense against censorship, and the board has invested that authority in me. And now I'm grateful to say that I cannot be criminally prosecuted for upholding the right of a book to be on the shelf.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. All right, Nicole.
Great, thank you. So I'm a little less directly connected to the topic of libraries. I am a professor in a school of information. So schools of information are essentially very interdisciplinary collections of faculty and students who are all focused in some way on the kind of intersection of information, technology, and people. And when I describe this to people who have never heard of schools of information, often what I say is this is what happens when librarians discovered the internet, because the kind of key issues that we're concerned with are really around information. And this is, so I think in addition to the comments that have already been made, one piece that I would like to also think about is the role of librarians and the fact that they are, that libraries are so much more than just collections of books, right? That that the librarians are really the ones who are helping to kind of help folks find information that they need, thinking about how it should be organized, and really, perhaps most importantly, kind of doing some curation or vetting, right? So that we can look at the fact that the internet has enabled kind of limitless access to information, which makes the need to kind of have some context for that information even more critical. I think the other thing I'm thinking about is just the fact that libraries are also now increasingly the place where people without internet access at home or work are able to do things like file their taxes or look for jobs. And also, I'm sure that the library in Ann Arbor now also has access to musical instruments and art that you can take home for the week. So I think that libraries are so much more than books, and that the role of the librarians is really critical. I also think we would be remiss to have this conversation without kind of acknowledging the backdrop of the Trump administration's efforts to dismantle the Institute of Museum and Library Services that provides a lot of support for not just the libraries themselves, but also academic research on archiving and how we think about and what is the best way to kind of work with and ensure access to vetted information. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Nicole. All right. I'm going to get the conversation started up here, but I do want to remind you that this is a conversation. We invite your questions. I see at least one hand up here for a card. So please raise your hand if you have a question for the panel, and then we'll get to those questions. So a theme I was hearing as you were talking was about the erasure of history and saving cultural resources. Part of what Nicole brought to that conversation was, bringing structure to information, bringing continuity to information. That information has often been considered the impetus for social change. So how do you connect the journey of social change through access to literature to the freedom to read? And anybody can go.
So the question is really when the society changes and the freedom to read is so important to keep. Yeah, I think libraries have gone through many changes, of course, because the society changes and we have to be part of the society all the time. I think we have to be very, very sort of founded on our core values. I think that's the basis for everything, and then you can act from that. And the core values are really, democracy. And I would say we have a very good Library Act in Sweden. I hope we will keep it, you never know, but we have a very good Library Act. And it says that the purpose of libraries, that's to develop the democratic society. And it's also to strengthen the freedom of speech, and they should be inclusive for everyone. That's sort of part of the Library Act. So I can see when the society changes, you just have to keep the news stories coming. It's part, and you have to say, well, technology, that's new ways of doing your work and new ways of meeting people and helping them to navigate, as you said, in this new society. But still, the core is still there, and it will be. So. And again, I think the integrity of the libraries is so important to keep, especially in these days.
Thank you.
I'll just jump in quickly. I guess the lens that I would use is through understanding our own identity. And I think, given the fact that the banned book topics are primarily disproportionately around marginalized people and topics. So thinking about the access to books as a way where, in particular, young people may kind of learn about their own identity and feel less isolated by being exposed to the fact that there are other people like them in the world. That for me, that's kind of the connection between social change and access to books, is through kind of understanding our own identity and to be able to kind of better see ourselves as part of a collective and not necessarily feel isolated.
I will say that in the US, our education system force feeds us what texts our whole entire life, K through 12, even into college, we're told what books to read. It's really important, and I found this out firsthand. I grew up in sort of these two worlds. I grew up in a very colonized, systemic structure, right, where I went to school. And then I also had parents at home that taught me about our actual histories and things like that, stuff that I did not learn in school. In fact, what I learned in school was 1492 and Columbus and et cetera and all that stuff. And I just remember being the defiant child in class that was like, that's not true. That's not what my dad told me. And I just being very conflicted about my identity, okay? I was like, what is the truth? And so, as I always tell anyone, when you're in school or you're learning or you're hearing things and something sparks with you and you question it, that's the prompt for you to go out and do your own self-education and understanding and your own research. And libraries are the resource for that. Books are the resource for that, to go and self-educate, to learn and to understand the contradictory and maybe different perspectives. Of the 4,200 books that were banned and targeted for banning in 2023, almost half, 47% of those books were BIPOC authors or about BIPOC or LGBTQ topics. There is a reason for that. There's definitely censorship going on in this country. Not sure about Sweden or other countries, but it's definitely a targeted ban that is going on, and it's been going on forever because books, history, etc., is a perspective. It's a perspective of the winner, and the winner is oftentimes the oppressor. And so it's our obligation as humans walking along in this human journey to self-educate and understand our own truths and not just take the text in the book and the information that is given to us, but to go out and challenge that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And also, I think the basic principles of public library are probably not necessarily widely known, but, when librarians, we kind of sign the creed and oath when we're initiated, and that is that we stand up for free speech, right? We stand up for free speech, and it's not like we don't like censorship. It states we resist censorship in all its forms. We resist censorship in all of its forms. And that by its nature, like when I signed up to be a librarian 35 years ago, I didn't think any of this stuff was controversial. I don't feel like I had anything to do with politicizing the basic act of making information available. That has happened to us. And, if the basic principles of librarianship become in a sense, a stand or a part of social change, then I'm all in favor of it. But 35 years ago, I think all of us would have thought, like, yeah, the First Amendment and resisting censorship, sign me up. I'll do that as well. The reality is that we are living in a time wherein it is strongly imposed upon us the things that we should read and what we shouldn't. I love the fact that people think books are dangerous, right? I have been reading my entire life, and I know that books are dangerous. I know they're frightening, they're terrifying. You can fall in love. You can live in someone else's shoes. It's not simply about, it is a way of self-discovery. It is about identity, but you can identify with other people. You can identify with evil villains. There's so much that's in literature and in writing and recorded history that we have and hold dear. There's also trashy filth, right? Like we have, Boulder Public Library, we have so many books on the shelf that you would probably think, like, really? You've got that on the shelf? Yeah. Yes, we have all of those books on the shelf because we are here for people to discover what it is that others thought, right? And also to, in the process of doing so, discover themselves. I believe that reading is essentially a creative act. We are constantly defining who we are as a people by reading and as an individual, and in fact changing what we think. And that's a powerful tool of social change. Like, it's a crazy powerful tool of social change that you can read something and think differently than you did before you read it. That's pretty transformative.
Anybody have some follow-up thoughts or questions from your conversation? All right.
I can just comment because yes, you didn't know what the situation is like in Sweden, so I thought I might comment on that. I would say it's not the same. We haven't gone that far, but we do follow the situation here closely. We did have activities on Banned Books Week last year to really see because quite often the Americans, it comes to Sweden, but it takes some time. So we're following that very closely. We've seen some sort of hassle around these drag queen story hours that we had with security needed for the librarians, etc., and with the local politicians started getting into what we actually are presenting and also into the collections. We're supposed to be sort of neutral, so we are not allowed to ban books like that. But I would say the conversation in the media is often about reading books and not buying books that are sort of bad quality. So that's also a conversation that's going on that we have to be aware of. So the power again of the story, of reading, of books, but also the power of the library's collection. I think that's really amazing in these days when sort of it's not so difficult to get hold of books. Still, the power of the collection of the library is very symbolic and very, very strong.
I guess I'll just jump in. So one of the things that my field has focused on is kind of the history of various technologies and media and how they are kind of considered from a policy perspective. So if I'm recalling back to grad school, one of the reasons why books are kind of treated differently than, say, radio, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is because with, for instance, broadcast channels like radio, you can be kind of exposed to it without an act on your part, passively. You're standing on the corner and a car comes by, and so this is why, so this kind of passive exposure versus reading, which is more active, right? And that you are kind of entering into that engagement and doing it in isolation. And so just kind of trying to kind of think about the act of reading itself. And so I guess I'm just struck by the kind of interesting connection between this act of kind of actively reading in isolation and then the kind of themes that Danielle and David have both brought up in terms of this kind of being able to identify with others, not just the kind of narrative of the winner, but also the being able to kind of have perspective shifting through through reading, which is very much not isolating in that sense.
Can I just ask a question? I'm getting a bit curious because, with this, nowadays we're getting more and more oral again, and with all the podcasts, in Sweden at least, the podcasts are getting more and more popular, and they also contain stories, also about these sort of banned issues and about LGBTQ issues, etc. So I'm just wondering, is there any sort of anything going on about banning podcasts or banning other sort of storytelling? Because it's really the same, and you can do it on your own, and you can get into other people's shoes, and it's just another way of telling stories. So is it just that the books are so symbolic? That's sort of a question.
I mean, I was thinking about that today too, because I've looked at my own evolution of living in libraries as a kid. That was my safe place. It was a place when I didn't have anywhere else to go, I went to the library, and I loved to read, and I fell in love, and I was identified with different characters, et cetera. But as my evolution and things get busy, and you're a busy adult, and you have 100 things going on. Podcasts is something that, and audiobooks are what I listen to mostly. But I was thinking about the same thing. I'm not answering your question, but I just want to mention it's the same. I was curious about the same.
The book has been a fascinating technology, right? It's 500 years old now. It's had some legs. I don't think it's on its last legs by any means, but certainly there are other means of telling stories. I think why the written word is so frightening is that it becomes it is a form of representation which has an element of permanence, right? So the oral traditions which pre-existed writing were equally powerful, maybe more powerful, that the people memorize stories. But the document of the technology of actually writing and recording history for a moment is, it does position that author in a position of power, but ultimately it also positions the reader in a position of understanding and drawing conclusions upon it. And I think that one of the very first things the printing press, Martin Luther posted the edicts everywhere. I mean, that was a moment of profound dissent, right, with the Catholic Church and his attempts to reform the Catholic Church. So, it is the seeming permanence of representation which is frightening, right? So Allen Ginsberg, we're in Boulder. I'm not a huge fan of Allen Ginsberg, but he was here. So Allen Ginsberg said one time, he said, you're better off throwing a pile of dog shit on the statue of Ulysses S. Grant than writing the word shit. And so think about that for a second. Like, you can throw dog shit on the Ulysses S. Grant statue, and you haven't committed a crime. But if you write the word shit, it might be banned from the curriculum of a third grader. You couldn't say it on television, but it is the process of writing it down. It is the process of writing it down, which he saw. It's the representation of the idea which we're terrified of. We're terrified of a representation of something that we don't necessarily identify with, or our government does not feel like we should be representing that as what is the truth of the matter. And it goes all the way back, right? It's like, we're on a university campus, right? So Plato's Republic, right? One of the seminal works the first thing in the Republic, if you wanted to establish a form of government which was kind to each other, does anybody know what the first thing you do is? What's the first thing you do if you want to establish a form of government which is peaceful and they'll keep working? You kill all the poets. Kill all the poets is the very first thing that you do if you want to have a form of government which is able to control the populace, because you do not want anyone, to be able to interpret that reality in a manner which is other than what we are told to believe. So it's an interesting kind of history of our world, but representation is frightening, right?
All right. Well, thank you so much for that deep conversation there and the great conversation amongst the panelists. I would like to turn to some of the questions that we've gotten from our audience. And so I'm going to pair these two questions together. And it's about book banning and children. And so we're being asked, is it ever appropriate to ban a book that is designed for children? And why does anybody think it would work when the internet exists?
Yeah. That's really my question from the beginning. And you talked about representation and permanent and symbols, etc. But I think really we have to, if you look at it the other way around and say, what rights do the child have today? And if we go back to the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, that we sort of in Sweden, that's implemented in law actually, and that states very clearly that the child has the right to freedom of expression, freedom to seek, receive, and information, and all sort of ideas. So I think if we put it the other way around, the child has rights. So, and then again, I think the context is the most important. The children shouldn't be alone, of course, when they read difficult topics. They need someone to discuss with and put it in context. And having said that, I said, no, you shouldn't ban any books, but you should be there and discuss it and have a conversation with them. Yeah. And that's what libraries and librarians are for.
Yeah, I would say the same. No, the answer is no. There is not a situation. So if I were to go to the public library and say I want this book banned because it's not appropriate for children of the age of 8 or whatever, it's confusing for them, whatever. I mean, early in my career, I do believe a lot of concerned people came to request that a book be banned. I mean, I don't want to, that's not what we're experiencing now. What we're experiencing now is 70% of the requests for banning a book are coming from either elected officials and or well-funded organized groups. They're asking for a book to be banned from the library, and essentially, and they're doing it under the auspices of parental control, right? So I'm a parent. I definitely believe in parental control, even though my kids don't necessarily. But what I'm doing by coming in and saying, like, we need to have greater parental control, I'm basically taking away your parental control and your parental control, because I'm saying I don't want the book to be in the library. You don't have the right then to allow your child to read it. And that, in a sense, I feel like is just totally wrong. And so, no, there's not a situation where a book should be banned because someone else may want to have their child have access to that book.
I, as a mom myself, and being faced with books that my kids have brought home and questioned it, I wanted to be the banner of the books in some cases. But I feel like it does a disservice, and this is just my own parental thoughts and perspective and opinion, but I don't censor things from my kids. They're curious. They want to know things, and I'm not going to be like, no, you're too young. You know, my mom used to do that to me, and it drove me crazy. I was like, well, at what age am I not too young? So I never censor anything from my kids. If they, I remember my son, every parent goes through the age of like, how are babies made, and you're like, oh God. I just remember being like, all right, let's just face this head on, as I showed him a video of a birth, and that was that. And he was like, oh God. But, I'm just that parent. So I think when you ban things from your kids, whether it's books or, anything really, you're doing a disservice to them when they enter the real world and have to face these things head on, and they might not know how to handle it. Story time. So when I lived in South Carolina for a brief period of time when my kids were in elementary school, and my oldest son was in 4th grade, and he came home with a book, and he was like, Mom, we're reading this book. I can't remember the title off the top of my head, but he's like, it's about a young white boy and a young Native boy, and it was during the time of like white settler coming in, and these two boys kind of befriended each other against what was supposed to happen. Natives you're supposed to kill the savage. And so this book had the theme of like, they never called him a Native American boy, they referred to him as a savage, and he was dumbed down, and he didn't speak good English, and it just was these constant microaggressions against Native kids. And as my son is a Native boy reading this, it took me back to my childhood and being faced with these microaggressions and watching cartoons and watching mascots and seeing things on packaging and just constant microaggressions that make you feel dumbed down or less than or tokenized, or a Lucky Charm on a mascot's jersey. And I just thought, I don't want my kids to feel that way, like how I felt. And I immediately wanted to just rip the book out of his hand and be like, you're not reading this damn thing, whatever. And and then I marched into the school the next day, and I did question the teacher, and I said, do you understand that you have a Native student in your class? And she's like, no, I didn't. And I said, well, this book, and I read it cover to cover that night so I could go in informed and have an intelligent conversation with his 4th grade teacher. And I just said, this is a book that, we're in the 21st century now. We should be reading books about things that are more progressive, not, dumbing down a Native kid and how the white kid is superior to the Native kid. Because this had an effect on my son enough that he brought it to my attention. And she just said, we'll give him a different book to read, and he'll write a different report. And I said, no, he's not going to do that. Sorry. But that was a pivotal moment where I knew I was going to move the heck out of the South and move to an area that had a more progressive mindset and schooling system, hence why we landed in Denver. But that was, my reaction was I wanted to ban this book from my own son. But I thought, you know what? No, he's going to have to face this his entire life like I have to. And he has to be prepared. He has to understand both sides of the story so he can intelligently speak and respond to these types of issues. If I banned him from this, then he's not going to be prepared for this as he gets older. So that was something that I really wanted to do at one point. But speaking of children books, there's one of my favorite children's books that was banned. It's called Fry Bread. And it's by a Native American author. He's Seminole, and it's a story about a Native family making fry bread together in their kitchen. And the children are, curious about fry bread, and the family wanted to give them the history that fry bread, even though it's considered a Native American traditional food, it's not traditional. It was stemmed from food born of colonial systems. And so this book was banned because they felt that children that are not Native would feel white guilt if they read this book. So we're banning children's books that are literally telling accurate stories and histories because parents feel like, I don't want my kid to feel guilty for being white. And that's the stem of a lot of these issues. But I say all that to say is that, if you want a really beautiful book that is well done, has won many awards, is by a Native American author, get Fry Bread. It's an awesome book.
I guess I don't have too much to add, other than just kind of thinking about these questions and noting that they've also been applied to the history of the internet with the Communications Decency Act, and that at least in that discussion, I think it's safe to say that that children have been kind of politicized, and that this kind of rhetoric of protecting children has been used to then take away the rights of adults to do things like access pornography on the internet. And so this is part of a larger, obviously, social conversation that we're still trying to figure out.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much for all of these great questions. I'm going to pair these two. And we're talking a little bit about curation and controlling the narrative. Curation involves selection and rejection, and people use that to literally control the narrative. How do we distinguish between curation and censorship? And what can we as readers do to make sure that narratives are preserved?
Well, that's a core librarian issue, isn't it? Really? So I was looking at David here. We can help each other. And I'll make it the easy way out, as I'm working at the National Library. So we're collecting everything. It's really because it's for research and it's for democratic reasons. Anyone should be able to walk into the National Library and say, I want to read that book, I want to read that article. No selection at all. So that's the easy way out if you're a National Library, but I think in the broader sector, librarians and libraries do have a very, very large responsibility. As we could make it sound like, any books, we will just get any books in the library. Yes, but we also have responsibility, as you put it, for the hidden stories, for the history, to contextualize, to get sure we get all stories told in the libraries, get all stories for all kids. So it's not only that get everything, it's also very, very big responsibility to tell all these stories. And of course, the National Library, we've been around for, 800 years or so in Sweden. We have all the history and all the prejudices in our collections. It's awful. I can be so ashamed looking at. We also have we have the Sami people in Sweden and indigenous people as well, and where we describe their stories, the metadata we've been using, it's shameful. Of course, it's awful. So we try to face that now, talking to the community, and how can we handle this? How can we cope with this situation, and how can we get more of your stories, as you say, more oral stories into the National Libraries to make sure we are the National Library for everyone in Sweden, and that we can tell all the stories. So it's a very good question, and it's really in the heart of librarianship to keep finding the balance and getting something for everyone and telling all the stories.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, we are limited by the amount of resources that we have in a public library in a local community. But yeah, I have multiple staff who do almost nothing but buy books. And I guarantee you they are buying books with the intent of offending all of you at some point. It is, that is kind of the methodology of public librarianship, especially in a popular collection. There are bound to be books that you find offensive in the public library, and that's true across all levels. And honestly, like when I say that it is the role of public libraries to resist all forms of censorship, that's easy, right? It's easy when it's stuff that you find just horrible and racist and like that. It's much harder when you have to defend a book that you don't believe in. And I have found myself in that situation in Boulder multiple times. Like I am there defending a book that I think is a pseudoscientific piece of shit, trash. Like it's an awful book, poorly written, But it got a lot of reviews, and it's on the New York Times bestseller list, and so guess what? Everybody has a right to have access to it. I can tell, I mean, one book we had a challenge for, I mean, the challenge was very simple. It said, this is an imperialist view of Thanksgiving. And so when somebody challenges a book formally, there are 5 of us that read the book in its entirety. We go back and look at reviews, and I read through this book and I thought like, oh my God, this book is terrible. It's like a bunch of pictures of, fat, happy white people sitting around dinner eating turkey sandwiches, and then these drawings of indigenous people, which were not the Wampanoag. I have no idea what sort of, if there was any formal tribal representation to the drawings that were in this book, and I thought, this book is awful. And yet then there's also a justification for it being on the shelf, because I assume that some family wanted to see this picture of, the book went out quite well, they wanted to see these pictures of people to talk about something else. They didn't want to talk about the history of the event, but they wanted to talk about the level of, like, whatever it is, friendship or commonality that you find over eating a meal together. And that was what they wanted to believe in. And so I had to defend that book. It stayed on the shelf. And that sort of gets complicated, right? It's never easy. And so, yes, there is a form of curation. Our form of curation is there's a limited amount of resources to buy everything. But I guarantee you we're buying books of all types. And I guarantee you, there are books there that offend me. And if they offend me, I guarantee you that many of them would offend. We all are offended by different things, right? So you would be offended by some of the stuff that's on the shelf.
All right. So talking a little bit more about how books make it into the mainstream. How can libraries and citizens prevent the pre-censoring of materials by publishers and book buyers who might shy away from controversial topics and authors? And David, I think you talked a little bit about that in terms of what's happening, curation in libraries, but so maybe we want to talk a little bit more about what's happening in the publishing industry.
Yeah, it's the publishing industry. It's shocking the degree of consolidation, and the power is in owning the content, right? Like, there is a great deal of power. The reason why Rupert Murdoch scoops up different publishing industries is not because he thinks, I don't even think he wants to push a message. There is power in controlling what gets into print, and so as we see the greater and greater consolidation of publishers, and is it now just the big 4? I mean, there is a growth in independent publishing still, but that's such a hard business, and it's almost impossible to make profit in publishing now because of the industry around the major 4 publishers, which just churn out a lot of stuff and have a major marketing effort around them all. So a lot of times, we buy books that are on the New York Times bestseller list. There are great books that are published that we are not buying at the public library, which is a popular consumption library, because nobody wants it. Nobody wants the book. And the way to get those books and do it is like, buy those books, or tell your public library you want to see this book in your public library. We buy almost everything that anybody asks us to do. And sometimes it takes a few extra steps, but there are distributors just for independent publishing materials. Boulder Bookstore is another great place. They pick up a lot of independent publishers. If you ever go to an independent publisher conference, and I've been to several, they're just brilliant books that are being published all the time, award-winning books too, but that's the ticket, right? If you win an award, then suddenly somebody else will pick you up, and your second printing will be by, Random House or something like that, and you get the big dollars. But there's great books being published every single day. It's a shame that they're not more widely read.
I guess I'll just note and say that one interesting trend I've seen when my daughter self-published a poetry book on Amazon, which is, and just kind of thinking about how wonderful that is to kind of bypass this whole, infrastructure of publishing monies and marketing, but yet at the same time, Amazon is the one that is giving us this freedom, and so kind of trying to sit with that as well. Yeah.
All right. Collapsing these questions, which are aligned, do you feel that using the excuse of protecting the children or suppressing stories about oppressed or harmed peoples is contributing to the compliance or indifference of the general population.
Could you
Should I try that again? And so, and maybe I should not try to combine those. So, how do you feel if the censorship about the censorship of literature and educational materials surrounding the history of places that are being occupied or otherwise harmed is contributing to the compliance or indifference of the general population?
Can you reword that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't understand.
As I would say in a focus group, can I have another sentence on that? Do you feel that censorship of sensitive topics contributes to general indifference amongst the population?
That's a great question. It is a great question. I don't know. I don't necessarily give up the straw dog. I don't think the public is necessarily by in its whole compliant. I don't think that's true. But obviously, if all of these things were eliminated from our history, what would be the outcome? I hesitate to say that it's even possible to eliminate all of these, marginalized and disparate voices. They are us. They are our history. You can't just simply eradicate them by eradicating the books, right? It's like you don't just get rid of a book and then suddenly the history is gone. So I don't know. The murder of George Floyd led to an explosion, not in terms of necessarily of publishing works by and about Black people in this country. Those books already existed. People started buying them at a higher level. People started asking them for at the public library at a higher level. But the industry had, at least probably not to the extent consistent with the quality of the books that were out there, but there were great books that were being published every single year about the history of the United States and the history of racism in the United States. It just wasn't the case that they were on the New York Times bestseller list. So is there a correlation between banning the books now? I mean, the outrage and the notion that organized groups like, shall we name them? I can, Moms for Liberty, No Left Turn Education. There are highly well-funded groups that are trying to ban certain books from school curriculums and also from public libraries, just because they've now having to confront with that. I feel like a lot of times the answer would be, and this kind of goes back to the previous question, is like, in my position where I'm talking to people who want to have books banned, I feel like 90% of them could be solved if they would just talk to their kid. I want to say, you need to go talk to your teenage son. I can't do that because I'm a public, official. I'm a government official. I can't go say, the solution to your problem is to go talk to your kid. But I feel like in 90% of the cases, if parents and or caregivers would spend a little bit more time talking to their kid about a history that is represented or a story that's being told, they could work their way through that dilemma. I guess the part that I don't understand about the question is I don't see compliance. I don't see a compliant public. I don't know if you're a compliant public. I think if we were up here saying to definitely ban books, you probably would have thrown us out the back window there at some point.
Any other thoughts?
I mean, I guess just maybe the thing that stuck with me is this idea of the general population, and that maybe, that it's, that we're all individuals, and that, the sensitive topic that may be censored may speak to us as individuals in a way that it wouldn't speak to someone else. And so that's where I think that I struggled a little bit with the idea that we're this kind of homogenous collective, when really the power of books is around the way that they kind of affect an individual because of other things in their lives and how those stories resonate or don't. So not really an answer, but just what I was thinking about.
I have to disagree a little bit with David. I do think the banning of books, while it doesn't eradicate a whole history or cause like a whole entire dismissal of something, I think it does perpetuate and plant seeds, and it does cause cycles to continue generation after generation. And I think I reflect back on my own experience growing up, or the books that were given to me in school. I wasn't represented in any of those books. We read books about white kids. We read books about white people's stories, and I was never represented. And I have to also equate that to art. So I'm an artist, and I definitely redirect the narrative when I curate art shows, because it's underrepresented in the art world as well, being a BIPOC person or a Native person or even a woman. And so, I think there's a lot of parallels to books as to art, and I have seen and I have lived that experience of it definitely having an effect on me, on my community, on my people, even on my children, by not having that representation in books that are available that portray a whole wide, diverse community where it's very much homogenized.
Thank you.
No, I'd just like to short comment. As I said, that's the responsibility really of librarians to also make sure everyone is represented and who is being published the issue as well. Because if it's hard to get published in some subjects, the censorship is already there. So it's really an ecosystem. We have to make sure. Well, we have to observe and be very closely. So see where is the censorships coming in, because it came in very different points. And then again, I would like a short comment on the parental control, I think, again. And I think maybe we have a stronger movement in Sweden for the sort of the right of the child. I think that's very important to move forward. Yes, you're a parent. I also have 4 kids, but still, our kids are supposed to grow up as individuals, and they have their rights to see new ideas and to form their own identities.
All right, thank you. All right, we have a couple of questions on the same topic, framed differently, but basically the gist is, what can we do as citizens and individuals to counteract book banning and censorship in public and school libraries?
There was a great story. There was a library I think it was in San Diego, a public library that was, parents came forward. They wanted a book banned. I think it was genderqueer. They wanted that book banned from the public library or the school library. And so, government officials bowed to the pressure of the public to come in. And so then basically everyone who disagreed with the decision bought that book and delivered a free copy to the public library and set it on their doorstep. I thought that was a nice form of resistance. Amanda Gorman, who gave the inaugural address, she's a poet, a spoken word poet. And I don't know how many of you watched the inauguration of Joe Biden. I don't wish to discuss politics, really, but it was a great poem. Like this was a powerful poem delivered by a young black woman, not only about our recent history, but about a history of our country. That book was developed into a children's book, quite a popular children's book. And recently, a library in Florida decided they were going to ban it. A school library in Florida, you had to be in 8th grade in order to read the book, or and even then when you were in 8th grade, you had to request it from the librarian. And I just thought, man, this is just the worst thing ever. And so I thought, what I'm going to do? I printed the entire poem, and it's a long poem. If you remember, she was up there for a long time. It's a long poem. I printed it on a gigantic banner, and I hung it in the Boulder Public Library. And I was waiting for somebody to come in and say to me, well, the print's too small, or the poem's too long. And I'm like, I'll get you a chair. You can sit out here and read it. It's a great poem. And I think the entire thing that the person who had it banned all they said was, it's confusing. It's confusing. That was it. That got the book banned from the school library. I think there have to be overt. We're in a time where I believe in overt forms of resistance in the form of just hey, we still believe in like the First Amendment, like there is a right to free speech. And that is a simple kind of thing. And no other, they can talk about parental control all they want. And I definitely believe in parental control. I believe in you sitting down and having a conversation with your kid and deciding whether or not they want to read that book. But you cannot control what some other parent's decision is going to be. And that is already a violation of their freedom of speech. So, do what you can to step up and resist by taking small steps. And if a book is banned in Boulder Public Library, like I expect you all to buy a copy and deliver it down to the library.
I did see that as of April 7th, there's unions representing libraries, librarians, and federal workers sued the Trump administration to stop the dismantling of IMLS as they accuse the federal governments of usurping Congress's power. But I do think that is one area to look at, is the dismantling of that group of funding and support for libraries and museum studies.
Yeah, it is bound to have the IMLS, which doesn't directly affect the Boulder Public Library. So as Nicole mentioned, the Trump administration signed an executive order defunding the IMLS. So the state of Colorado receives, I think it's $3.5 million from the IMLS fund. Most of that money goes to employees who run, basically, they support all of us. They support public libraries, they support school libraries, they support college libraries. But the main programs that are run through there are the Talking Book. So any person who is visually impaired in the state of Colorado can call the state library and they can have a book recorded, read to them, any book you want. That is a program that's entirely funded by IMLS funding, so federal money. And then the other one is, whatever you may feel about it, is support to prison libraries. So there is no funding for prison libraries at the state level that does not come from federal money, IMLS money, that supports libraries in prisons, which, for librarians, it's a big deal. Like, we believe everyone should have free and open access to materials to read. And so I would encourage you to, contact your federal representatives and encourage them not to allow IMLS money to be defunded. It's just the beginning, right? Yeah. It is just the beginning.
Can I just ask a question? But do you have any legislation that says that you have to deliver those books to, if you're visually impaired, etc., or is it just that you?
The Talking Book?
Yeah, the Talking Book.
Yeah, so the Talking Book, those books are delivered to people's homes. You can sign up for a program for Talking Book if you have visual impairment, and they will, it's literally any book you want. They could be your daughter's poetry. Mm-hmm. And if somebody called in and requested your daughter's poetry book from Amazon to be read aloud to them, then somebody with the state library they'd find a volunteer or somebody who would read those book of poems on a recording, and it would be sent to your home.
And your library, you're obliged to do that by the legislation, or is it just that you do it?
No, that's a program that's been in existence in Colorado for at least 30 or 40 years. Yeah, so it's a great program. It's not obviously, it's a small program. $2.5 million, $3.5 million, whatever is good from IMLS. They do, the state library does provide support for all libraries within the state of Colorado. And they don't do legislative work, but there's legislative work done on their behalf. The programs that it does fund are critical programs, but for a marginalized group, yeah. Right? So there is people incarcerated, people who have visual impairment. These are the kinds of things which you begin. You've heard the story, right? You start to narrow the scope of services. Like, you're next. We'll find a reason why you don't need to have access either.
Yeah, these are two examples of people who literally would not have access to this information without these support services. And so, yeah, I think that we do need to protect those populations.
All right, we have just about 5 minutes left. And so I'm going to invite you to either, maybe share a closing thought, or if you don't have a closing thought, you are also invited by one of our questioners to share a book that might be an inspiration or a blueprint about how to meet this moment around this topic.
What kind of book?
A book about creating change or giving hope or meeting the moment right now.
So I'll answer the first part of that question. So thinking about other forms of technology outside of the book. So I'm thinking specifically about things like social media or the introduction of the telephone or television. We know that historically, every time a new technology is introduced, it is typically met with fear and anxiety, often kind of reflecting that particular moment. And we are seeing this now with social media and artificial intelligence. And when I give talks about this, one of the things I point out is that one of the first kind of instances of this is around a technology that we wouldn't even really consider a technology today, which is writing itself. And in the Plato's Republic, the concern was raised that essentially writing is dangerous because it will, well, a few things, but one of the main arguments was that it will lose our ability to have memory, essentially, when everything is written down. And yet, at the same time, we know that ability to write things down is what enabled scientific progress, right? That we weren't, as humans, in these kind of oral storytelling traditions where the style of those stories was very repetitive, right? For reasons, because that's how those are easier to remember. And once we were able to kind of write down ideas, we as society didn't necessarily need to kind of, we could start at that point and kind of move forward. And so I guess just that was kind of what I was thinking about with this, with a lot of these discussions about books, and just kind of thinking again about the technology of writing and reading, and what it enables us to do both as individuals, which I think we've talked about a lot, but also as societies and communities.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think what we've really been discussing here is that no matter what technology there is around, the stories are stronger, because, I mean, when we're now going backwards in history and actually banning books that are so far away, and we see all this new technology coming up. But I would say in Sweden it's more like the parental control of parents. It's more about social media. It's more about TikTok. It's more about, you know, spending too much time on your cell phone. It's more about getting the young people back to the books from the social media. That's really where the sort of discussion and in the public, in media, is in Sweden. And in the politics, we're working very hard for getting younger people to read more. We're talking about the reading crisis. So I think there we are, you know, going back to reading, being able to identify in stories. That's a very, very strong motion that I think is important to keep on to.
All right, we just have a couple more moments. Any recommendations on books or closing thoughts?
I'm tempted to say read everything. Read the First Amendment. Read the 14th Amendment. I mean, it's not rocket science. And the reality right now is that we are under pressure to remove LGBTQ voices and Black voices from the conversation. Those are the books that are being challenged. Find a list of books that have been challenged, and go through and make a point of reading every single one of them and find out what's offensive to you in that. I want people to make their own choices up, but the frightening thing, right, is the degree to which, under duress, we begin to self-edit ourselves. And so for a young person growing up who finds identity or some possibility in a book that expresses their gender identity or their expression of more clearly who they are, that they should be deprived of that book, I find just horrifying. And so I would not, I would encourage you to like read some of these things. Some of them, sure, some of them are graphic, right? I can assure you, I mean, where I said earlier, books are powerful, right? They're not dangerous. We know what's dangerous for kids. Guns are dangerous for kids. Sexual abuse is dangerous for kids. Wars are dangerous for kids. It's not books. And encourage people you know to read. Yeah.
Thank you, David. And we're tight on time, but Danielle, I want to make sure you have a moment if there's anything else you would want to share.
I just want to say that this just really drives home the point of the power of art. Books, writing is a form of art. Visual art is a form of art. Music's a form of art. When things get banned, it just shows what the power is behind this. And it's incredible. And I just hope artists keep challenging and keep putting out their perspectives. I will say there is a book that had a lot of controversy in the state of, in Denver specifically, but in Colorado, it was a book on Christianity that was written in the 1700s. And I was part of a documentary to uncover this book that was proudly displayed in the the Iliff School of Theology in Denver for many, many decades, until somebody questioned it because it was wrapped. The cover of the book was made from the skin of a Native American man. This is a book that I agree should be banned. It was not because of the content of the book, but because of the book itself. This book there's a lot of history behind it that people don't know because they tried to hide it after they realized how horrible this book was, but it was displayed proudly in this college for many, many years under a case. I was part of a documentary that PBS did to uncover this history, and it's called A Next Chapter, and you can Google it on YouTube, I think, find it. It's a very short documentary, but I would just since we're on the theme of books and it was a project I was part of, I would go look that up.
All right. Thank you so much for your great questions today, and let's a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You bet. Yeah.
Continuing education knows that at the end,
Oh, my name.
and we can help them do that because we take the time to really listen to their needs and we understand all the different options that are available across the campus for them.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.